Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture's home of the Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas Pavilion. We are ICA. We are here in full force for all 2 weeks of COP28. We're happy that you've come here to the home of sustainable agriculture. And we're going to get started in just a moment. Before we start, I did want to just recognize, thank you very much to our partners and friends, Juan Valdez Coffee. We have a friend in the back of the room preparing wonderful fresh coffee. I can already smell it. It smells so good. So after the panel's over, we invite all of you to have a cup of coffee and have some conversation. We're going to get started. So we have a panel, and I'm going to introduce our moderator, Sharada Krishnan. She is the Director of Programs for the Crop Trust. The panel today will really be talking about research, development, biodiversity, conservation of diverse genetic material for crops, and why that's important for food security and for resilience and for a sustainable planet. So without further ado, I'll turn it over and have a wonderful panel, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Margaret, for the introduction. And so this event is, good morning to all of you, and this event is organized by, it's jointly organized by the Global Crop Diversity Trust with the World Wildlife Federation, WWF, and the CGIAR Alliance Biodiversity SEAT Alliance. So Margaret talked a little bit about what this event session is going to be about. So it is going to tackle about the importance of crop diversity and harnessing this diversity for food security, to not just for food security, to counter loss of biodiversity, and also to tackle climate change. So protecting our global crop diversity is key to climate change resilience. The species richness and genetic diversity of crops and their wild relatives can help us adapt to and mitigate the impacts of climate change on food systems and ensure food security, especially for vulnerable rural communities, which majority of farming communities are rural, and increasing climate change requires climate-smart crops, especially those adapted to drought, and also this requires further policy and financial decisions, as well as proactive action and implementation. So the speakers and panelists today will highlight the importance of climate and water-smart crops and present concrete measures from the field. So we have 3 speakers today, and our first speaker, I'm going to introduce all our speakers, and then I will introduce our keynote, and then we'll have a panel discussion today. So our keynote is going to be presented by Dr. Stefan Schmidt, who is the Executive Director of the Global Crop Diversity Trust. And before joining the Crop Trust, he previously worked as Deputy Director General and Commissioner for the One World No Hunger Initiative at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, which is BMZ. And then on our panel, we have, unfortunately, one of our panelists could not come today. So it was, we were supposed to have a little bit more gender balanced, another woman on the panel, but unfortunately, she called in sick, and so Janie Rue could not attend today. And so we have next to Stefan is Dr. Andrew Gardner, who is Associate Director Biodiversity Conservation with the Emeritus Nature World Wildlife Federation. So he has it's the local environmental charity that works in the association with WWF. And then last but not least, we have Cargill Massot. Cargill is the Director of Biodiversity and Environmental Health Impact Platform at the CGIAR. So with this, I'm going to invite Stefan to give his keynote.
Okay, I'm Wyatt. So I sit here, okay? Yeah, that's fine, hi. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining in this morning. Well, we are, and I think in essence that brings us all together here in the middle of a multifaceted, very interconnected global crisis on climate change, biodiversity loss, food insecurity, and so. And that what adds to it is growing geopolitical tension. We had the pandemic and all of that. And we are all aware of that, and we all know that there is no, let's say, magic bullet solution to all of that. If there was a magic bullet solution to it, it wouldn't require a COP like this each and every year with 70,000 people gathering. So this is a political struggle, it's exchange of views and everything. What from my perspective and from our perspective as the Crop Trust, there is, at least one thing we can take for sure. There will be no food security in times of climate change. There will be no proper adaptation to climate change. There will be no solution to biodiversity loss as long as we don't use crop diversity. Crop diversity is a very, very fundamental thing. We by no means, we cannot afford to neglect. Mankind created crop diversity over the history of agriculture over the last 12,000 years, and we survived always on the basis of this growing diversity. This is man-made biodiversity. This is part of our, it's a very amazing thing with, agro-biodiversity. It is, on the one hand, it's part of our cultural heritage, and on the other hand, it's part of our nature. That is really where culture and nature, where man and biosphere come together. And we need this. It becomes more and more important now in times of climate change, because this diversity on a very different level, on ecosystem level, on agro-system level, and down on genetic level, is the raw material for better adaptation to climate change, raw material for breeders, for farmers, for ag researchers, but it's even more than just a starting point for better adaptation. Using crop diversity ticks so many developmental boxes. It also helps us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture by breeding new varieties that are less demanding when it comes to fertilizer, other inputs, water, soil quality, and all that. It ticks the healthy nutrition box simply by providing a broader variety of fruits and vegetables, of pulses and everything. It ticks this developmental sustainable livelihood box for millions and millions of smallholder farmers who are dependent on better crops, better seeds, higher yielding crops, crops that are more adapted to climate change, adapted to changing market demands and all that. So there is a huge universe of interconnected benefits which we could tap on when using crop diversity. The tragic point here is that, well, the man created this huge amount of diversity. We know about more than 200,000 varieties, old varieties, land races of wheat, more than 100,000 varieties of rice, thousands of maize, potato, and just to name a few of them, there are so many others. sorghum, millets, beans, lentils, and so on and so on and so on. So many neglected and underutilized crops. That's incredible. Well, we need it more and more. It is disappearing from the fields. Disappearing from the fields in line with industrialization of agriculture around the world. Yeah? That is, no need to discuss today whether this as such is good or not. I mean, it is, all in all, it's a basis of growing wealth, of development in general on Earth, but there is a flip side to it. The more it disappears from the field, the more we need to make sure that at least they are safely conserved somewhere in gene banks and seed banks, and from there made conserved, made available for breeders, researchers, farmers today, and more important in future generations. Because today we not yet know what kind of traits we really will need in the future to find the right answers to new environmental conditions. It is not just that we say, okay, we need one new hybrid, more drought-resilient variety. That will not work. We have thousands of agroecological environments on Earth. We have constantly changing patterns of pests and diseases. This a myriad of situations where we need myriads of answers. That's the magic of diversity, and we need to keep it. It is a necessity, but at the same time, it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity we have. We should use it. First, I think we should do everything to keep as much diversity in the fields as possible. So we call it, it's an in situ conservation of things. That's important. But facing reality, not to be naive, to say, okay, if trend continues, at the same time we need to make sure that we at least conserve it in gene banks, in seed banks, before it's lost forever. And then, once it's lost, it is lost forever. We cannot rebuild it via a 3D printer or something like that. So we need to make sure it is conserved. And when it is conserved, it is also a great opportunity. We can take this as a one-stop shop for farmers, breeders, researchers, and all of that. That could work, it should work, when gene banks, seed banks are properly funded, when everything is done to make them work together, everything. So that is this global system of seed banks, how we phrase it, is insufficient. It's not properly funded. Gene banks do not work together. The human resource development, the capacity development is absolutely insufficient. When looking at a typical gene banks in one country of the global south, it is a tragedy. Usually it's a tragedy. Yeah? They are lacking a proper cooling system. They are lacking proper facilities, trained staff, documentation, viability tests, safety duplication. All that is missing in general. And we need to make sure that we find another perspective on the importance of seed banks and gene banks. The Crop Trust is the international organization mandated to do so, but we only can do this in partnerships with international agriculture research, with international NGOs. We try to forge political alliances to raise the profile, to make sure that more people are aware of the importance of of crop diversity and agrobiodiversity in general. And I think the meetings like today are a great opportunity to discuss those things and to spread the news. And happy to have, we have international agricultural research. CGIAR is our main partner organization by far. Yeah, when it comes to support the conservation and use of genetic resources. So the CGIAR gene banks are absolutely, they are a global treasure box. They are this treasure box of genetic resources of this global public good. So CGIAR on the one end. And WWF, I would say that you are our most important civil society partner. Yeah, there is currently no other globally active NGO that regards the importance of agrobiodiversity and the importance of what the crop trust is doing, like WWF is doing. So happy to be able to be with you here this morning. So yeah, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity for these introductory remarks. Happy to discuss.
Thank you, Stefan. So Stefan has highlighted what the challenges that we are facing, the global challenges that we are facing today. And the Crop Trust, we are a funding organization, and what we do is we fund ex situ conservation. So we fund gene banks to ensure that crop diversity is protected in perpetuity. But we also have a lot of the things that we are losing. The agrobiodiversity is being lost in the wild, which a lot of the wild relatives of our crops are wild in nature, and they don't do very well in ex situ conservation. So we are losing many of those natural areas of crop wild relatives, as well as in farmers' fields. As farmers adopt high-yielding varieties, we are losing many of the land races. So now I'm going to turn to my first question to Andrew Gardner. Andrew, I know, how is WWF contributing and showcasing practical approaches to support land restoration by applying agroecological and regenerative practices and enhancing crop diversity?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start really by building on what Stefan has said, but using a very local example, and I think of the UAE and Southeast Arabia generally. But I think these things basically can be used, you can say the same thing for other countries and other nations. So here in the UAE, obviously it's a hot country. We're in the middle of winter and it's still hot outside. And you can imagine what it's like in summer. And it's a desert country, so the rainfall is very low. And so agriculture is fairly limited, and the UAE has to import the vast majority of its food, somewhere between 80 and 90% probably. But the UAE is, of course, looking at food security and food sovereignty as a real matter of importance for the country. And the way they're mostly doing this is by high-tech agriculture and looking at climate-controlled agriculture, which can produce whatever salad greens and tomatoes through the year in vertical farming and glass houses and so on. And of course, this is really important. But in terms of crop diversity, it's actually very, very limited. And there are only a few types of crops and a few varieties of those crops which are really being produced. And I think where WWF comes in is to look at really the traditional oasis and mountain village kind of farming, which of course has been practiced for thousands of years here. The history goes right back to the Neolithic times. And what is quite interesting, I guess, is that with climate change, it's getting hotter and potentially drier, although the science is a little bit difficult to interpret there. And this kind of farming is already pushing kind of it at its limits because of the climate here. So we are really interested in looking at ways that we can actually build some resilience and adaptation into the traditional farming. The traditional farming is mostly on quite a small scale. The actual techniques that they've used traditionally are not necessarily the most kind of efficient. For example, that they're small fields with flood irrigation, which is fairly wasteful on the water that there is. And because of this, the country has already started to have a lot of problems, particularly with water, because the over-extraction of water from the aquifers and using non-renewable water and so on has left the water table falling. The traditional fallage systems, which are the traditional irrigation systems, are run dry, and so on. So in order to kind of really counteract this and support local farming in the villages, you know, something has to be done. And what we're looking at is to look at and encourage some novel crops, as well as kind of agricultural techniques like mulching and stuff, which is not traditionally done here, and more efficient irrigation. We're looking to introduce and pilot novel crops, which are the ones we're looking at are actually wild species that live here naturally in the mountains. They're adapted to the climate conditions. They're very drought tolerant and so on. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those in more detail, I think, maybe in the next question. But also, there are wild relatives of crops here as well. And I think it's really important that we kind of look at those. And crop diversity is not, you don't hear that kind of mentioned much here. Even the traditional agriculture tends to be based on rather few crops. There's dates, which are probably the main ones. They grow fodder for the goats, some citrus, some onions and things like that, but fairly limited. But in the wild, there are olive trees, which are growing right on top of the highest mountains in UAE above Kalba. There's a small population of wild olives there, an isolated one, obviously adapted to pretty extreme conditions anyway, and who knows what their genetic importance is. So I think it's really important that those trees are preserved. The Hajar Mountains, which is the mountain range which runs through UAE and Oman, northern Oman, has the only known populations of wild dates, not the cultivated ones which have gone feral, but truly wild dates. And again, you know, who knows what kind of genetic treasure house these might have. And so it's super important that, you know, these are kind of identified and recognized as being important and collected for seed banks and gene banks and so on. So this is something that we are hoping to do over the next while, is to actually try and locate where these resources are and actually do something about them so that they're more protected and collected. But in terms of what we're doing in these kind of farms, we're looking at both diversifying the crops that are there for the good of the farmers, trying to give them some higher value crops to make the farming communities kind of more sustainable, more resilient as we go into the future, and look at really, I guess, NBS solutions, nature-based solutions to this, using nature and trees and plants which are native here to actually produce a commercial benefit for those farms. One example is honey production, which is really highly valued here. And the main species of resources for the bees, and particularly for the native bee, which is not the cultivated bee, but the native red dwarf bee, are 4 species of native trees, which have different flowering seasons, so that there's resources kind of throughout the year. But over historical times, the tree cover has been hugely reduced for various reasons, for firewood cutting, but particularly in historical times, there was copper smelting in these mountains using charcoal, which obviously required the trees. And I think at that time, a lot of the tree cover was lost. And since then, goats have also preventing regeneration. So we're looking at ways that we can actually reintroduce some of these trees back into this habitat. Obviously, it's a long-term thing because the trees take quite a long time to grow, and we have to protect them from goats, and we don't want to use irrigation, so we're trying to use arid zone planting techniques which allow the trees to grow without irrigation. So that's one of the things we're doing, and I'll talk about maybe the other ones a bit later. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. I think that was, I know water, especially in desert agriculture, water plays a huge role. And I was really interested in that you mentioned that you have a wild olive tree species here, because one of the biggest challenges with olives is the Xylella fastidiosa bacteria, which is affecting a lot of olive trees in the Mediterranean. And so maybe this native olive, because it's very similar to the grape industry, where the grapes, the phylloxera, was wiping out all the French grapes, and the American grapes contributed the roots as a rootstock, was able to prevent the grape industry from being devastated. So hopefully there is hope there with the wild olives, and so that kind of proves why it's so important to conserve this diversity. So changing track a little bit, I think I'm going to talk, we are conserving all this diversity, but without use, the diversity, we really need to put that diversity to use. So, Cargill, I'm going to ask you this question. Over the next decade, CGIAR's research initiatives aim to transform food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. What action is needed to accelerate research and meet global goals, the SDGs, including the SDG 2.5, and how the seed collections maintained by CGIAR gene banks contribute to this effort?
Thank you very much. The question is a very tough one, and I thank you for that. And also thanks for the organizers for this opportunity to come and share. I think Stefan has said most of the things I'm going to say. So I'll be mainly underscoring what he has said, similar to what Andrew has said in terms of the native species and so on. Going back to really the agenda of CGIAR for the next decade, we have 5 key impact areas which we have associated to the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And those could be summarized in nutrition, food security, and health. I'll elaborate a bit later. Then we have gender, youth, and social inclusion. We have poverty reduction, livelihoods, and jobs. Then climate adaptation and mitigation. And I'll finish with the one I'm leading, which is environmental health and biodiversity. And really, when we talk about biodiversity or crop diversification, it becomes very interesting. When I started the job and was talking to the other colleagues, one of the questions I got was, yes, you are happy with telling us about biodiversity, but biodiversity for what? That was the question. Sometimes people say, it's okay, you are getting funding, so you are promoting something, but you don't even know the reason you are doing it. So one of the keys really for us to work with the communities and try to reconstruct or rebuild diversity, taking into consideration the 5 impact areas. What kind of diversity we need for nutrition, what kind of diversity we need to enhance resilience or adaptation to climate change. Stefan was giving a few examples, and I was thinking, when we talk about the humankind, really indigenous knowledge and communities have a lot to offer in terms of some of the crops. They know, for your information, for CGIAR, we mainly operate in a global south, when majority of the people really depend on the agricultural sector. There are other opportunities, but over 80% we depend on the agricultural sector. So repeating of what Stefan has said, there is no adaptation with no crop diversification. So people have been able to understand what kind of crops are able to cope with droughts, what kind of crops are able to cope with floods. I grew up in small countries in Africa, in Burundi, and my grandmother used to tell us why they have whatever crops they have. But go there today, I get lost. In fact, I have not been there for a while, and I get lost because what I used to see when I was kid, no, they are not seeing it again. And I go to what Stefan said in terms of making sure that we have in situ conservation, but ex situ conservation. We need both. We need in situ for the young generation to know there is these opportunities. And we lost in a way or another, we can't make the same mistakes. The same thing in ex situ, because we know climate change, we can do or we are able to do, but we can't predict what tomorrow will be. We can strengthen our resilience, our mitigation, but we have to anticipate in terms of unknowns. So that's mainly what we do at CGIAR. We can't do it alone, so we depend a lot of partnership. In fact, for WWF, we are settling a resolution of food systems with a particular focus on biodiversity for the upcoming UNEA 6, the United Nations Environmental Assembly, really to underscore it. There have been some resolution on biodiversity, but bringing in now the concept of food systems and resilience to climate change. So there is a critical need. And when we try to see, like for the SDG 2.5, yes, we are doing a lot of work in terms of really building genetic banks. And to make sure that we don't lose the focus to it, we have embedded it in our strategy for the 10 years to make sure that the conservation, sustainable use, and benefit and cost sharing are clearly indicated. And then we set clear targets that we will have to monitor and see whether we are getting there. It's open, it's an invitation to all of you. We are still working on the metrics. We are still working on the performance assessment approaches to make sure that the assessments we are doing is really something that is not questionable and it's not biased towards our agenda. So it's something that is really very critical. For gene banks, I repeat, and Stefan has said it, it implies investment. Thanks to Crop Trust for the great work you do, but you need more support. As I said, that most of the work we do, we can't do it alone as CGIAR. I do believe Crop Trust, you can't do also alone, you need the partners. And here I really call for the countries also to invest seriously in that area. On one hand, they can support Crop Trust, but they have also to build the local capacities. There is a lot of problem to be sorted out, but that's where international cooperation, you are all here because you are interested by the agenda. We can work together in terms of supporting countries, but inviting also the countries to plan accordingly. And this is very, very critical. I'll pause here for now, but it's really a call for us to cooperate, especially in terms of coming up with strong metrics to use and keeping in mind really the 17 development goals, at least the key impact areas. And I do believe if you focus on that, it's easy to create awareness and to get attention. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Cargill. Yes, I know it is. So, I mean, the international gene banks are important, but also the national gene banks, and even going down to the community level, because that's where all those land races can be preserved. And because community seed banks, we look at the global system, and we have to start with the community, that they're preserving the land races, and then they're backed up in the National Gene Bank, the International Gene Bank, and finally the Svalbard Global Seed Vault to ensure that there is all these safety backups, because not only are they protected locally, but also need to be backed up so that way they are never lost in the event of a catastrophe. If it is lost from farmers' fields, at least it's backed up somewhere else. So thank you for that. And so Stefan, I'm going to ask you a question. This was supposed to, Janie was supposed to be here, and so you get the question.
Oh, Janie's had head on.
Yes.
What would IFAD say?
Why do you think the conservation of crop diversity is often looked in climate discussions? Because a lot of times in climate, I mean, you talk about carbon credit and carbon sequestration and all of that, but the conservation of crop diversity is always overlooked. And how can governments, business, and philanthropy partner to elevate crop diversity on the global climate agenda?
Yeah, I think there is quite a very basic, a very fundamental tragedy. The more we run into crisis, the more we should reflect on and care about long-term solution, sustainability, in perpetuity thinking. However, we don't. It seems to me that the more we now are facing crisis, temperature are rising, problems are rising, the more decision makers forget about the long-term solution. There is a lot talk about sustainability, but we all see that all the SDGs are not on track. Yeah, that's a tragedy. We forget about those long-term things. And a very basic long-term thing would be to say, let's secure what we have. And there is plant genetic resources, crop diversity is just an example. That holds true for tropical rainforest, for landscapes, for mangroves, for all those global public goods. No, we are not sustainable. As long as we are not willing and able to provide sustainable funding for these very basic global public goods, there is no sustainability. That, I would say, that's a tragedy we are in. And we should take this as a starting point when it comes to political dialogue and communication. Political decision makers need to be aware that, yeah, these global public goods deserve more recognition in times of climate change. Yes, we need to talk about this whole transformation of agri-food system. We need to, of course, it's great we have this loss and damage fund. It's great that other now mechanisms start to take off. Huge pledges to Green Climate Fund, that is marvelous, that's great. However, let's not forget the very basics. We do not have any access to the Green Climate Fund. They are looking for country-based innovative solutions. You need to be innovative. You need always to think about 22nd century. But when it comes to, let's reflect on what we have. Let's be for a moment a bit traditional. Let's conserve. Nobody listens to you. That's a kind of a tragedy. And we should take this as a reality and start to break through somewhere through partnerships. Yeah. And the second part of you, what it requires, I see it from three perspectives here. It is the one thing is a tragedy that there is no sustainable funding for, and again, it's just agri-biodiversity is an example here. It would require crop diversity. The conservation would require about $30 million US a year globally. That means for us, it would require our endowment fund to grow to 850 million US dollar to make sure one time filling that, and it would put us in a position to provide in perpetuity funding of the essential operations of that. This amount of money is nothing. It is nothing compared to the annual agricultural subsidies on Earth. It is zero. It is nothing compared to the annual turnover in the food and agricultural sector. So that's about sustainable funding. The other thing is, to get more funding, you need more political recognition. That is why we're sitting together here. We do everything, and invitation to all of you, join us. The third thing is to make sure that internal cooperation of all the gene banks, seed banks is working better. That is what we can do on a very basic level, and that is likewise important to make this global system more efficient, more effective, yeah, and avoid unnecessary costs. Yes, we need to increase efficiency. Yeah, let's work. Let's work together. And that is, something bringing all the gene banks together, not just the international ones, joining up with local and national gene banks, for example, in these regions with others, make sure that everything is securely back up outside countries and in the Svalbard Global Seed Vault and things like that. So that is, I would say, I think it would have been in a sense of IFAD, and also I would subscribe to from the crop trust perspective.
Thank you, Stefan. I know, because I think this COP has been great because there has been a lot of leverage on food and agriculture with the CG getting a lot of pledges this past day or so. So I think we just have to be visible in all of these forums, and we have to be a broken record talking about this all the time. And so I'm going to ask one final question to all three of you. Maybe some of you can think about it. And then the same question I will ask all of you, and then I will open it up to the audience to ask questions. So this is, what were your expectations? What did you expect from the outcome of this conference in the context of crop diversity and climate change? Where and how would you like to see efforts to strengthen crop diversity? And what could be the role of your organization in this context? So I'll start with you, Andrew.
Thanks. Well, I think the thing that I would like to see really coming from this is that crop diversity actually gets recognized as a serious issue, as one which can make a real difference towards agriculture going into the future, and one which at the moment is, as Stefan says, it gets very little recognition. Here in the UAE, I just don't hear anybody talking about crop diversity and agrodiversity, and yet, it is so important for the future. So, and WWF International has been working really hard in the kind of space of food systems, and I think there's a general recognition now from this COP and coming into this COP of the importance of food systems and sustainability in agriculture and so on. So I think that I'm quite hopeful that as to what's coming in the future, that more finance will be available, there will be more recognition, and I think this kind of session today is really important in that, actually showing that crop diversity is something which is critical. In terms of what we're doing here locally, I kind of hinted before, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. So just very, very briefly, one thing that we're doing in the mountain villages here is looking at a native tree, which is called the Arabian moringa, which is a species which is found really from the Levant through the Saudi Arabian mountains, Yemen, Oman, and to here. And it's a species which was recognized right from ancient times as being a really valuable species. The ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Nabateans all recognize it because it is a tree which firstly can grow in very, very harsh environments. It's growing up on stony hillsides with you don't see anything else almost. But it produces a really valuable oil, similar to ben oil from the Indian moringa and so on, which can be used as a salad oil, and particularly it can be used as a cosmetic oil as well, which is what the ancient Egyptians used it for. It's got medicinal properties, it's full of antioxidants and vitamins. And it's very, very easy to grow as well. In Saudi Arabia, they're starting to look at this as well as a potential crop, and we are here in the UAE. It grows quickly, it's, as far as we know, got very few diseases. It can start producing a crop within 2 or 3 years. It has very low water requirements, which is critical. And I think, so we're trying to push this, working with local communities and local farmers who know the tree very well anyway, because they've used it as a sort of a medicinal tree, and they collected the seeds in the mountains. But I think it has a huge, huge potential. And another area we're working on is with halophytes, salt-loving plants, particularly that grow in the local salt marshes. The ones we're looking at here is a local species of Salicornia, which is, of course, used as a human food, something called samphire or sea asparagus and so on. But the local species has not been used, and yet it can grow in extremely salty, extremely hot environments. And so I think it too has a potential as a sort of a nature-based solution by enhancing the salt marshes in the wild, and probably as an agricultural crop. Another species is a perennial salt bush which grows along the coast. It's very common here, which you can use to make green salt, which is basically dry the leaves, grind it up, and it makes a salt substitute, but one which has high in antioxidants and vitamins as well. It's a healthier salt, I suppose, which offers potential for local communities to actually use nature and nature-based solutions, if you like, to make a living and to make their agriculture more sustainable.
Thank you, Andrew. Now Cargill.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will even build on what Andrew just said in terms of almost understanding the type of crops we have, especially the one we are losing, in terms of the nutrition traits, but also health opportunities that comes with this, because it helps a lot in terms of communicating with the policymakers and communicating with the people. Then in terms of what CGI is doing, I will not give you too much details today, because for those who still be around, I want to see you in the food pavilion next Monday at around 12:30. We will be giving more details in terms of what we are doing in this area, but I can give you kind of heads up for now. We are working really in terms of co-creation with the communities. How do we make sure that the research we do in the area of biodiversity includes the thinking and the indigenous knowledge? We used to do it, but we were not doing it the right way. We used to think about, then try to see how we disseminate the knowledge you have created. And sometimes you realize that it's not necessary, the critical needs and the critical information. You go with what you think before you even understand how you should build on what the communities have. So with the new portfolio, we have a lot of, any single initiative we work on, especially when we talk about biodiversity and environmental health, is to make sure that we co-create with the communities, we understand where the priorities are, what are the issues, and really how they would like to tackle them. Stefan said it, if you go to the communities, probably you don't ask them how they see the world in the next 100 years. It's very difficult, but it's easy to go with a certain vision and try to see how they can contribute to that vision. So it's something that we have been doing with the, Andrew was talking about nature-based solutions. We have an initiative focusing on nature-based solutions and working in the few communities really to get it done. We have also the agroecology initiative, where we are really doing a lot in this area in terms of really what are the practices we need to keep so that we can be able to preserve what we have, being in situ and ex situ. And of course, we talked about the gene banks. We have an initiative that is really focusing on strengthening the gene banks, not only at our CGI level, but really working with the countries and see how do we strengthen the capacities, how do we duplicate something that we put in our main gene bank. In fact, our main gene banks and something going to Norway and something staying around in the CGI centers, but try to build the capacities of the countries. But as I said earlier, we need really to work hard to make sure that the countries, when they plan for the investment, they also plan for maintaining. Stefan gave us a list of the barriers, how they can start planning. Once you know a problem, you should be able to come up with a solution. It's not always that easy, so we need to continue talking and talking. I used to be a teacher, so you have to teach us several times to get there. So these are some of the areas, other details we will say or share on Monday for those who will still be around. But we look for partners. I should not miss it. Looking for partners to continue doing this work, understand what Crop Trust is doing, and what they would like us to incorporate in the research we do, the same thing to WWF, and anything that your colleagues are doing, we are making sure that we can generate things together. And this is more critical because the first phase of our first decade is ending next year. So we are already in the process of designing the next portfolio for the next 3 years, 2025 to 2027, and we are welcoming contribution and ideas or suggestions or things that require solutions and where you think that our research can contribute. I pause here. Thanks.
Thank you. And then Stefan?
Yeah, this COP here and what brings us together. And ultimately, the world needs to stop burning oil and gas as coal as soon as possible to avoid the worst. Yeah, CO2 emission and other greenhouse gas emission as soon as possible. It is very good. It's great. It's a great achievement that food systems, agri-food systems, now have a role, have a place here at the climate COPs. Why? First, we will not avoid global warming. We need to expect some, and even today, higher temperatures, increased temperatures up to 3 degrees or so is reality in many parts of the world, where farmers they face it, they have to deal with that. They are already now at their limit. Yeah. So adaptation to changing climate is absolutely essential. We cannot avoid it. Yeah. Other crops, better crops, usual crops we use, they are losing their nutritional content under heat stress. That's another reason for thinking about a new diversity of crops, simply to not just survive on calories, but provide a growing number of people around the world with healthy food that they can afford. And at the same time, while agriculture is suffering under climate change, agriculture has solutions. Yeah, reducing methane emissions. Yes, we can. Currently, around 1/3 of emissions have their origin in the agriculture and food sector. So we need answers from the food sector, not just from the energy and building and industry sector. No, also from the agriculture and food sector. They have a role to play, and it is possible. It is possible with alternative proteins, with better forms of meat production, with breeding more resource efficient crops, and with less input, with less fertilizer that require a lot of input, and all that is possible. Looking for more agroecological thinking here. Yeah, that's really absolutely necessary, and therefore I'm absolutely grateful for, so thankful for having now food at center stage at COP. And once it is there, yeah, then let's talk about diversity. Yes, we do not talk enough about diversity, but for now, simply the fact that food is recognized as an important factor here. I think that's a tremendous good starting point. Let's take it from here.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for all your insights. And yes. And now I'll open up for questions. Yes.
Kurt doesn't always need a mic, but we'll give you one.
That's true. I don't need a mic. Yeah, thank you. Very informative, the discussion. And just a dilemma that I have. For example, I work with ICA, and the vast majority of farmers that we work with are small commercial farmers, small family farms, smallholders. And we've been trying to get them into the formal production, marketing, and distribution channels. In there, what you have prioritized are certain cultivars that are desirable to consumers. Now we're speaking about smallholders, so the trade-off is what do I plan to earn an income in the market as opposed to preserving or conserving land races that are important to us. So my question to you, what is that mechanism? How do we achieve that balance that these farmers are able to maximize their small incomes to take care of their families, but also within that framework that they could preserve these plants that he said he saw in the field of his grandmother, etc., etc. And we know that are useful for the traits that we need to preserve in the genetic diversity.
Yeah.
Get started. Yeah, because it is, I work with smallholder farmers. That's the job we do as CGI. So we get these questions very often. And one of the point that everyone is putting, and I hope it will fly, is really the payment for ecosystem services. How do you make sure that what we are preserving that does not allow us to generate that direct income can be used in terms of ecosystem services? We talk about, let's say, the fragmented lands, especially in developing countries because of the human pressure and so on. So you get loss of habitats. And then you lose pollinators, you lose X-ray, the natural enemies, and so on. All those requires the payment for ecosystem services for us to be able to make it. And then really we talk, and coming from also my African background, it's quite amazing because you will get subsidies on the wrong things. Agricultural subsidies going on the wrong things, where priorities are not. And as we talk about co-creation at CGIAR, I do believe one of the things as we advocate for policy change, especially for the agroecology initiatives and the nature-based solutions, we have also an initiative on institutions, policies, and strategies. We really try to make sure that we advocate, we talk to the policymakers so that they put the subsidies where we need as we plan for the future. I suppose here my colleagues could add if they were.
I think one other thing that we're looking at is to actually bring in maybe higher value crops for farmers, because at the moment here the actual income that many of these small holdings get is very low. But part of that reason is what they're producing is not very good quality, and it's not does not have very good storage and distribution, so that by the time it gets to market, it's not not in the best of conditions and that sort of thing. So I think you have to address those kind of practical issues as well, I think, in order to support the smallholding farmers.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, fully agree with everything my fellow panelists already have said. One more aspect, and hopefully that will help answer your question also. We will not bring millets to broader markets as long as millets are regarded in parts of the world as a poor man's food. Yeah, that's the point. So that also means we need private sector. We cannot win this fight for more diversity without private sector. As long as they simply go for standardize the usual stuff, yeah, this is an illusion. So we need them somehow, and we are not yet there. 3 weeks ago, the Crop Trust invited to to a global crop diversity summit in Berlin. That was marvelous. 300 participants in the room. We had one participant invited from the International Seed Federation. That is great, yeah, to have them on board, but no private sector, no retailers, no processor. They are not interested. Yeah, they not it's very hard to get them engaged in this broader debate. Yeah, and that is something, and you can go through the entire value chain development here. You need them. They need to see the opportunities. Yeah, and perhaps not just now, but long term, in bringing more diverse food from the seed bank to the farm, and then from the farm to the fork. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think, yes, thank you. Thank you all. And I think we'll have to stop. I think we have reached, oh, you have one more question or comment?
Well, just, hello? Okay,
Yeah.
just a comment. If there is one quick question, we don't want to cut you off, but seeing none, I'll just make a comment that in the Andes region, I've seen a lot of the diversity conservation, particularly in places like Peru, where there has been a recognition of the value of the diversity of crops, going all the way through to the restaurants now that are now bringing, recognized as centers of gastronomic excellence, and bringing like tourism to Peru and other parts of the Andes for the food. So, it can be done. Maybe it's a little different in other parts of the world, but I do think the points of having the private sector partnership is really important. How to bring them in at the very beginning, not as an afterthought. How to develop the relationships that are mutually beneficial, because there is some lack of trust possibly because of, will you take this material and use it without helping us to conserve on the ground? So those are just things we have to keep working on. But if there are no other comments or questions, I'll turn it back to you for closure.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, in one of our projects that we are doing in Africa, the Seeds for Resilience project, and one of it is the user group. We have to making the diversity available to users, and it has been a participatory method where the farmers, the gene bank, all the accessions, they have been growing it in the fields, and the farmers have been invited to come and do an evaluation and select thing. And so a lot of the farmers who have come back have seen some of the accessions, the varieties that they have lost in their fields is now in the gene bank, and now they're requesting it. So it's being repatriated back to the farmers. So there is an interest in some of those old varieties that have been lost from farmers' fields, that the farmers are now able to get it back. So with that, thank you all for attending. And so to sum it up, I think we have many global challenges, but I think from all the speakers, what we have heard is that there is hope. And especially at this COP, food being one of big topics here this week and these 2 weeks, I think that brings hope that starting with food and then the crop diversity and the conservation of crop diversity can piggyback on that, and why that's important. And also we heard about raising awareness. I think that's where the COP comes in. And also the diversity of foods. It's not just the foods, but also the staples. We have so many staples that we consume, but there are a lot of those nutritious and underutilized crops. And now there is a movement to bring them to the forefront through the U.S. Department of State, the VAX initiative, the Vision for Adapted Foods and Soils. With that, I think there is a lot of momentum now for underutilized crops. And we need to diversify our foods and just not depend on staples. And also we need to work with communities, and it has to be a participatory co-creation, and partnerships are very important because be it private sector, public sector, but along the entire, from the local communities all the way to international gene banks. So with that, thank you all for coming, and thank you IICA for hosting this.